In the northern reaches of Somalia lies Somaliland, a self-declared republic that broke away in the early 1990s. It has its own government, its own currency, and its own army. Somaliland holds elections, maintains peace, and delivers public services, but to the international community, it remains part of Somalia. Somaliland's story begins not with ambition, but with survival. As Somalia descended into civil war in the late 1980s, the north faced brutal repression under the regime of Siad Barre. Cities were bombed, civilians massacred, and entire communities displaced. In the ruins, northern Somaliland clans and leaders made a decision that would change their history. They would not go back to be part of Somalia. In this episode of African Biographics, we look at the story of how Somaliland was born. The modern political map of the Horn of Africa began to take shape in the late 19th century when colonial powers and empires turned their focus to the region's strategic location between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. At the Berlin Conference, Britain, France, and Italy carved up the Somali territories, while Ethiopia, then known as Abyssinia, pushed east into Somaliland. Britain moved first. In 1887, it signed treaties with local Somali clans and established a protectorate in the north, later known as British Somaliland. France claimed the area around Djibouti, naming it French Somaliland. Italy took the south, declaring Mogadishu its colonial capital. Somali communities in the south were absorbed into British Kenya, while Ethiopia expanded into the Ogaden Plateau. British Somaliland remained under British rule until June 26, 1960, when it gained independence. 5 days later, it chose to merge with Italian-administered Somalia, which had just gained its own independence. Together, they formed the Somali Republic, united by the hope of bringing together all Somali people across 5 territories. The new national flag, first raised in Hargeisa, carried a white 5-pointed star. Each point represented a region where Somalis lived: British Somaliland, Italian Somalia, Djibouti, the Ogaden, and the Northern Frontier District in Kenya. But the dreams of unity quickly began to fade. Power remained concentrated in the south. The capital stayed in Mogadishu. 2/3 of parliamentary seats went to southern politicians, and the president and prime minister were from the south. Italian was kept as the administrative language, sidelining officials trained under the British system. There were no roads connecting the capital to the north. The distance was not just physical, it was political. In the north, frustration set in. Government jobs were few, political influence was limited, and development barely reached the region. What had been embraced as a union of equals soon felt like a lopsided arrangement. For many in Somaliland, the promise of unity gave way to a growing sense of exclusion. On October 15, 1969, Somalia's fragile democracy came to a sudden end. President Abdirashid Ali Shemake was assassinated by his own bodyguard while touring drought-hit areas in the northeast. As the National Assembly prepared to choose a new leader, General Mohammed Siad Barre, head of the Somali National Army, was already moving behind the scenes. In the early hours of October 21, he seized power in a bloodless coup. The constitution was suspended, political leaders were jailed, and Somalia's short-lived democracy was replaced with a new military regime known as the Somali Democratic Republic. Siad Barre came with bold promises. He introduced scientific socialism, a blend of Marxist ideals and Somali nationalism. His government launched literacy campaigns, land reforms, and revived the dream of Greater Somalia, an ambitious vision to unite all Somali-speaking territories under one flag. Unfortunately, the optimism would not last. In 1977, Siad Barre launched an invasion of Ethiopia's Somali-inhabited Ogaden region. Somalia's troops advanced quickly, but when the Soviet Union switched its support to Ethiopia, Somalia was forced to retreat. The defeat shattered Siad Barre's pan-Somali ambitions and deeply changed his standing at home. The fallout from the Ogaden War was severe. The economy collapsed. The military, once a symbol of national unity, became a tool of repression. Over 250,000 Somali refugees fled from Ethiopia into Somalia, many of them resettled in the north, placing added strain on resources and inflaming tensions with the dominant Isaac clan. By the early 1980s, it became clear that Siad Barre's regime was turning openly hostile towards the north. Development in Somaliland ground to a halt. Roads, schools and hospitals were left to decay. Public services and government funding were redirected to the south. Frustration turned to anger. In 1981, student protests erupted in Hargeisa. The government responded with a heavy hand, arrests, execution and intimidation. That same year, a group of members of the Isaac clan who were exiled in London formed the Somali National Movement, the SNM, determined to end Siad Barre's rule and protect the north. The regime's response was brutal. SNM activity was met not just with military force, but with widespread violence against civilians. Entire communities were accused of supporting the rebels. Arbitrary arrests, torture, and disappearances became routine. Families vanished overnight. In 1988, the regime launched a full-scale campaign against the north. The cities of Hargeisa and Burawo were bombed from the air. Some of the strikes were reportedly carried out by foreign mercenaries. Between 1987 and 1989, an estimated 200,000 Isaac clan civilians were killed. Mass graves lined the outskirts of Hargeisa. For many in the north, the idea of a united Somalia had already died. The union had not only failed them, it had become a danger to their survival. By 1988, after years of war and state violence, the Somali National Movement, the SNM, had gained control over much of northern Somalia. Siad Barre's campaign of terror had failed. Instead of crushing resistance, it rallied support for the SNM, especially among the Isaac clan who had borne the brunt of the regime's brutality. At the same time, Siad Barre's grip on the country was fast slipping. In the south, new rebel groups like the United Somali Congress, the USSC, and the Somali Patriotic Movement, the SPM, emerged, determined to bring down the dictatorship. As the Cold War ended, Siad Barre lost the foreign backing that had once kept his regime afloat. Without it, his government began to collapse. On January 16, 1991, Siad Barre fled the country and later took refuge in Nigeria. After 2 decades in power, his regime was over. But Somalia was left in ruins. For the SNM and many others in the north, the question then became, what next? The SNM even held talks with southern factions about building a federal system once Siad Barre was gone. But 2 events changed everything. First, the scale of the violence committed by the Barre regime, especially in the north, had left deep scars. For the SNM and many in the north, staying in the union meant risking their survival. Secondly, after the fall of Siad Barre, southern leaders announced a new government in Mogadishu without consulting the SNM. This confirmed what many in the north already feared. The political dominance of the south would continue. And so, in response, the SNM convened clan conferences across the north to chart a new course. While the south descended into chaos, northern leaders, supported by respected elders, chose negotiation over violence. In 1991, the SNM held a landmark conference in Burawo. Elders from major clans, including the Isaac, Deer, and Darod clans, gathered to make 3 major decisions. They declared Somaliland independent, reinstated the borders of the former British Protectorate, signed inter-clan peace accords, and agreed to form a 2-year transitional government with power shared across communities. By 1992, tensions within the SNM began to rise, mostly along sub-clan lines. To prevent further conflict in the north, another major gathering was held in Boroma in 1993. After months of dialogue, elders and political leaders adopted 2 key documents: a peace charter and a national charter. The peace charter focused on disarmament and building a national police. The National Charter became a provisional constitution blending traditional Somali leadership with modern governance. Veteran politician Mohamed Haji Ibrahim Egao was elected president. Under his watch, the Somaliland shilling was introduced and reconstruction began, slowly but steadily. Meanwhile, while Somaliland focused on peace building, the rest of Somalia unraveled. After the fall of Siad Barre, opposition groups turned on each other. Mogadishu descended into full-scale civil war. The USC and the SPM splintered into rival factions, each backed by its own militias. There was no functioning government and humanitarian conditions worsened. This is all while Somaliland took a different route. With no international recognition, no foreign troops and limited aid, Somaliland built a government from the ground up. Over the next decade, a series of clan conferences and transitional frameworks shaped the emerging nation. In 2001, Somaliland held a constitutional referendum transitioning from clan-based power sharing to multi-party democracy. The referendum passed with overwhelming public support and a strong turnout. International observers praised the peaceful process, but the outcome was never officially recognized by any government. Still, Somaliland pushed forward. Since 2001, it has held multiple rounds of presidential, parliamentary, and municipal elections. Power transitions have been largely peaceful. Successive governments point to these achievements as proof that Somaliland not only governs itself, but does so democratically and responsibly. The argument is clear. If legitimacy is measured by stability, rule of law, and democratic governance, then Somaliland qualifies as a state. Somaliland has its own currency, national security forces, and passport system. It maintains a functioning central government and holds regular elections. Its leaders also argue that their claim is in line with the African Union's long-standing principle of preserving colonial-era borders. Somaliland's borders follow those of the former British Protectorate, making its case a reinstatement, not a cessation. Yet, despite 3 decades of self-governance, Somaliland remains unrecognized. Without recognition, Somaliland cannot sign treaties, join international institutions, or access global finance. Somaliland has no control over its airspace and cannot compete in international sporting or trade bodies. It remains a functioning state locked in diplomatic isolation. At the same time, recognizing Somaliland is seen as a risk and could encourage other breakaway movements. The African Union too fears that setting a new precedent by recognizing Somaliland might destabilize other parts of the African continent. Africa's post-colonial borders have remained largely unchanged since the 1960s. Only Eritrea in 1993 and South Sudan in 2011 have gained independence through formal recognition, both after long and violent conflicts. Somaliland's significance also lies in its geography. It sits along the Gulf of Aden near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a vital shipping corridor through which roughly 1/3 of global maritime trade passes. The region has become a magnet for foreign military bases. For many years, Somaliland stayed on the sideline of this strategic competition. That changed in January 2024 when it signed a deal allowing Ethiopia to build a naval base on its coast. In exchange, Somaliland hoped for formal recognition. Ethiopia never publicly confirmed that it would grant recognition, but the deal sparked immediate tension. Somalia's federal government called it illegal. Protests broke out in Mogadishu. Regional rivals, including Egypt and Eritrea, were pulled into the dispute. Fears of a broader conflict began to grow. By the end of 2024, Turkish-led mediation efforts helped ease tensions. Ethiopia and Somalia agreed to de-escalate. But this episode highlighted just how delicate Somaliland's status has become and how its pursuit of recognition can quickly shift regional dynamics. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been the Agenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.